for another Wednesday, 1 p.m. California time. I am your host, Anthony Mueller, the wine reviewer for Washington State and South Africa for the Wine Advocates. Today, I have a very exciting guest who's also a fellow sommelier making fantastic wine in Washington State's JLT, Jeff Lindsay Thorsen from WT Vintners. Get him in here. Hope everyone's having a fantastic Wednesday. Staying safe. It is still a little smoky here in Napa. It has been tough, I'll tell you. 2020, just return to sender, right? It's been crazy. There are a lot of things going on in the world, and it's just a little challenging. I am wearing my United Sommelier Foundation t-shirts, giving some love to the Psalms out there. A lot of Psalms here in Napa that are without work. This is what happens when you have a interesting connection. 2020 is just beating us senseless with this. Let's see if we can get him in. Just waiting. Yeah, if you have a favorite restaurant, unable to join, let's try it again. If you have a favorite restaurant that, there he is.
Oh, yeah. Hi there. Doing all right.
Awesome. Cool. Awesome. So I was just in the middle of saying, for all the people out there who have a favorite restaurant that they go to, or if there's a place that they go to, even if it's like the regular weekday spot, if they know the server by name or the server knows them by name, if they know the bartender by name and the bartender knows them by name, have a favorite busser or favorite maitre d' or manager at a restaurant. Restaurants, they need a little bit of help right now, and it would go a long way if you just think about that restaurant, whatever that restaurant is for you, to think about them, maybe do a to-go order or something. There seems to be a fair amount of decent wine buys going on right now, since a lot of people can't sell their wine at the restaurant. And for those that are doing the social distance outside service, like we have in Napa, unfortunately with all this smoke, it's not really helping restaurants too much. But the Somm Foundation and restaurants, they need your love. So welcome, Jeff. Thank you so much for joining me today. Pleasure to have you here. For those of our viewers that don't know who you are, can you please get a quick background about yourself and WT Vintners?
Yeah, so Jeff Lindsay Thorsen, basically started out as a sommelier and felt like there was a little hole. So I got my first Somm gig in 2004. And then was hired to be a wine director at a coveted restaurant in Seattle, and just felt like there was a hole. So I went and worked at Harvest down in Oregon, and then Harvest here in Washington, and just kind of fell in love with the process, but felt like I was missing a piece, and that piece is seeing it, starting with the grapes, sorting, crushing, fermenting, and then you leave. I wanted to take it all the way to the end to bottle. So my now business partner, George White, the W and WT, Thorsen is my last name. The two of us started with 50 cases of 1 ton of Destiny Ridge Vineyard, and now we work with, depending on the vintage, 7 to 9 different vineyards in Oregon and Washington, focusing on Syrah. But that's, and just slowly over the years, kind of figured out, after the first vintage, I didn't know what the F I was doing. So I went and worked a Harvest in Burgundy and then a Harvest in New Zealand back to back, and felt like I sort of knew what I was doing, and then came back home, was humbled for a few more years, and then I think now I'm figuring it out.
Awesome.
Maybe.
So where'd you go in Burgundy?
Maison and Bois in Primo, so New Saint Georges.
Cool.
So pretty, like at that point they were transitioning from, modern, pseudo-modern industrial farming into biodynamics, and so it was really cool to see that transition, being in one row that was farm of, say, Clos Vougeot, one row's farmed like pumped with all sorts of garbage, and then the next is teeming with life and biodynamic. It was pretty special to see. and just really kind of, and further drove home like how special the art and process of wine and wine growing and winemaking is.
Cool. Awesome. So first off, how are you doing right now? For being a relatively small, um, producer, and being a floor som in Seattle, part of the time, it's got to be stressful. How are you doing right now? How's 2020 treating you?
Well, I've got one. The winery is all I've got going. The restaurant's been closed now for 5 months, and so is I'm presently the wine director at RN74 in Seattle. So kind of a temple to the wines of Burgundy and France, but with a killer Northwest selection as well. But we're just on hold. Downtown Seattle's a shit show, and there's no reason to open a restaurant in this moment in that place, and so. I'm just holding it down, getting to know my children. I got 9-year-old twins, and have dinner with my wife, which is glorious. And so that side of things is pretty special. Another side of things, like from a business standpoint, it's pretty twisted. Our whole business model with my background as a sommelier is that I focus on restaurant sales and wine-centric restaurants. We don't do a lot of retail, and so this has been a moment where we've had to do some hard pivoting to just kind of stay above water.
For sure, yeah. I mean, that's a lot of people are trying to pivot right now in the wine industry, and it's difficult, for producers who are reliant on on-premise sales, sales to restaurants where consumers drink them inside the restaurant. I saw a picture of you on social media. With gloves and the mask, the full gear, with bringing out glasses, doing tastings and whatnot. So do you find that you're having luck with people coming out and tasting with you?
I think people are being super supportive. Our wine club has been fantastic in supporting us, and then our tasting room is only allowed, because we don't serve food, is only allowed to be outside. So we've got a patio. As long as the weather holds out, we're open on weekends. I run solo, or I have one of our tasting room people, so there's less touches. It's the love and connection portion that's so important to us, and how we connect with our customers is largely not allowed through face covering and just keeping distance. And we're trying to create an intimate, kind of restaurant experience, so to speak, to share our story. And right now it's super freaking weird, frankly. It's a very disconnected process, whereas normally it feels really intimate, and we connect and build lifelong customers, right out of the gate. Now it's like, just, hi, here's your shit. These wines I'll tell you about from far away if you want to know more. And, it's pretty bizarre, but we're doing making lemonade out of lemons, I guess.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I can imagine exactly what you're going through. I was part of the team that closed down French Laundry to open up Adlib at the Silverado Resort. And when Thomas Keller said, no, this is going to be energetic, loud, and fun, it's like, and he basically walked up during pre-service and said, listen, if you need to get silverware from here to the guest, just pick them up, use your hands. And everyone's like, no, like, there's no white gloves, there's no tray. I look over at Dennis Kelly, and he's like, that means I don't have a tray to put my glassware on. He's like, oh my God, and I just remembered him. He'd stack like 8 glasses in his hand. He's like, this feels so wrong and weird. And I can only imagine, from a sommelier standpoint, who knows steps of service and hospitality and knows how to make great wine, trying to pivot, wearing gloves and masks, and it's got to be completely surreal and slightly uncomfortable, and just almost like the experience just turned down. It's not as sincere and not as rewarding. But
I haven't figured out how to tie, like, within these confines, how to create those connections, because it's so hard. Like, you can't even share a smile. You can't, like, it's bizarre. To be in a restaurant right now, like the guys that are doing that, it's got to be super surreal, particularly in a fine dining level. And In a tasting room. I think depending on your style, some places are really thriving in this, and which is like kudos to them. Like stylistically, I'm trying to stay true to our brand and the experience I want to create, and not kind of undermine what we've built. But while pivoting and not running my business into the ground because I'm so rigid in my expectations.
Yeah. As you said, 2020 is about pivoting and trying to figure out, what to do. So your path includes many years in restaurant service. You've become an advanced somm through the Court of Master Sommeliers. What initially drew you to wine?
So when I was 19 to 21, I dated a woman whose father had this crazy cellar, and so he was ripping all sorts of great corks from drinking Grange and Mouton and Old Amarone and like really some extraordinary wines. And that piqued my interest, and that became a little hobby. Right at the same time, my mom was dating a guy that the two of them were on a mission to try every Chateauneuf du Pape. So I got to kind of ride on their coattails there, and that allowed me to totally just piqued my interest. And I was climbing the corporate ladder for Nordstrom, and I was 21 and just went, wait, what the F am I doing? I'm not having fun. And so I went back to school thinking I was going to be an anthropologist and travel the world. And my little wine hobby, as I got into restaurants, turned out I was pretty good at it and had a natural affinity toward it. And then everything connected in wine, the art, history, culture, travel, dining, like just the human experience, all converges in wine. And so I was drawn. And then I heard when I got into fine dining, I heard about this person called the sommelier that just helped people have a rad experience through drinking, better wine, the best wine possible given the moment, within their confines and the confines of the restaurant. And I started researching different certifications, and I did the International Sommelier Guild, and it's kind of like run itself into the ground as far as I can tell. But that was an incredible experience, and met a lot of really, some of my best friends even now, 17 years later. And then from there, as soon as the court offered a certified exam, I ran right at that, did that, passed my advance in 2008. And then I was doing the MS exam on that track for a while. And frankly, it stopped being fun. And my love for wine, that experience was being diminished by the process. And so I just said, I got to stop. I need, I already got 2 jobs. I don't need a third that's not bringing me the joy, which is why I'm in this business. And so now I'm just, so now I have my foot in restaurants and the winery, and just, like I get to share my passion with people, like with something I'm creating, as well as with, the things that inspire me. And it's pretty rad.
Cool. So take us through the kind of culmination of WT Vintners, how it came to be, how you basically moved from, floor somm to now being, winemaker and, investing into winery and fully jumping into, the world of winemaking.
Yeah, so 2007 was our first vintage. We made 50 cases of almost adequate Syrah. And then in 08, that was, I mentioned earlier, was kind of, that was humbling and really cool. And that inspired my wife and I to travel around the world, visit every wine region we could, work in, as I mentioned, Burgundy and New Zealand, and then bring that knowledge back and apply that. And so 8, 9, 10, we made 50 cases again, 50 cases, 7, 8, 9, and then brought in Lake Helene, which is a Walla Walla vineyard, a couple tons from there. And so it's been slow and steady wins the race. Now 1,500, 2,000 cases is our production level. And for now, we're going to hold steady there. We have another brand called Raconteur, which is some negociant, some declassified wine, and that's allowed us to elevate the quality of the single vineyard wines of WT, as well as put something on a retail shelf that, frankly is, delicious Tuesday night wine, but also drives a little bit of revenue to help kind of facilitate the dreams, because owning a winery and making wine is a giant money pit.
Oh, for sure.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, right. Yeah. As the saying goes, you know how to make a small fortune in the wine business?
That's right. Start with the large one.
Yeah. It's interesting. So, when you first started out, what were your objectives and motivation? What did you hope to achieve?
Yeah, so I believe deeply in Washington wine. I think there's a lot of extraordinary wines, and then there's a lot of sameness, and which you find in every region. But what I felt like I could bring my international perspective and my kind of love of Burgundy and terroir centric wines, and as well as in the Northern Rhone and Syrah being our focus in the Northern Rhone, it's not traditionally it's many small parcels go into one grand van, so to speak. In Washington, the vineyards I work with, the closest one is 2.5 miles away. But if you went end to end, they're 300 miles away from one vineyard to the next. I'm in the middle of one of my vineyard loops. I'm on the back patio of my one of my growers right now at Boucher Vineyard in the Yakima Valley. But what I wanted to bring was this that kind of the terroir perspective of showing the individuality of Washington, because I think even when I was learning about Washington, living in Seattle, my understanding was like, oh, there's very little vintage variation. There's like this place tastes like this place tastes like that, or Washington tastes like this. But now we put together, we work 5 single vineyard Syrahs. You put each one next to each other, and they're made, barring a little bit of whole cluster, they're made exactly the same, and they're deeply different wines, and they're also from the same clone. So my hope was it was like an exercise in terroir that's kind of spiraled out of control.
No, it's good. I really enjoy those thoughtful programs when you take a bottling and say, this is what I want to do, and then you take another bottling, different vineyard, same clone, and you basically do the same thing to each varietal, but all you're doing is basically capturing sense of place, and it ends with the bottle,
exactly.
and it's so unique, and it's that's one thing that really I enjoy about your Syrahs is they have that that Lou D, that sense of place that you can clearly taste the difference between all of them that are really delicious. So what attracted you to making Syrah and the other Rhone varietals in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, Syrah in Washington, we grow everything. It's the Wild West. Like, I don't know the grand total, but we grow an obscene amount of different vinifera grapes. And to me, Syrah from the very, very early in my career as a sommelier, Syrah shows its sense of place in Washington. It can have, I can't speak to the nuances of different GIs or future GIs in the Barossa, but in Washington it's a massive growing region. We have basalt as the basic subsoil, but there's so much nuance, and I've just that grape shows the nuance more than anything else. I think the Bordeaux varieties, Red Mountain is very distinct, Walla Walla is very distinct, and it's a little more blurred between that. Syrah is like freaking different. Like everyone is every sub-region, microclimate, vineyard, even parcels within like this vineyard that I'm in right now, they taste totally different. And so to be able to kind of to highlight that rather than Washington as a whole, hopefully elevates Washington, but shows the the fantastic present and the potential of Washington.
Yeah, it has a great diversity to it, and a clarity and a precision that is clearly defined with its terroir, with its microclimates. People think, oh, it's Columbia Valley. The Columbia Valley catch-all. It works at the beginning, but then once you start to say, cool, well, how is Yakima different from Horse Heaven Hills, from Walla Walla? And you start to get all these different expressions that uniquely express the terroir. And that to me is what really excites me in wine, where it expresses where it comes from. And if you look at all the great Burgundies, you can start to tell the difference. And the Syrahs from Washington State, I think one day will potentially get to the level of being able to identify the different AVAs very clearly because of the soil types and microclimates. Just a quick question. I was thinking about this on the drive here because I know a little bit about your mindset as a person who has studied wine rigorously. I've sat the master sommelier exam twice. It is incredibly difficult, and you just have to be a glutton for punishment and just keep taking it and just keep studying and devote that chunk of your time on a daily, level, and you just have so much knowledge about the world of wine. Do you think that your knowledge of wine through years of studying helped you to be a better winemaker?
Oh, hugely, hugely. I mean, just the having a basic understanding of what the benchmark tastes like to be making to make Syrah and to have never tried Cornasco, Roti, and Hermitage, like you're doing yourself a huge disservice. I've had the luxury of trying thousands of them over, and that is, well, not unique, but is in, for most winemakers, gives me a unique perspective and a sense of intention. Like I know I'm distinctly making Washington wine and Oregon wine for that matter, but the goal is to do justice to the grapes as I would expect from their archetypes.
Yeah.
I got to be in the Washington Wine Commission, does this a road trip for sommeliers and trade people, but they also do some seminars, and they did a road trip seminar on Syrah, all blind, and it was Klopp, Chav, and my Les Collines Syrah, and like to be included in that, like I was terrified, and then I got all these texts like from people like, man, your wine is amazing, and like that like warms my heart and makes my day, like to be like to stand on the to be on the same table as like the people I revere and some of my most profound tasting experiences in Syrah's homeland. Like it's so freaking cool that I'm just doing it justice. All I can do is try to highlight the vineyard, and the grower does the lion's share of the work. And then I just we, through really old school winemaking techniques, like we tread everything by foot really gently all the way through fermentation. We take all spontaneous everything goes into old oak, more and more into large format oak. Like really just every time I visit the Rhone and Burgundy, for the most part, I'm inspired to just push a little further and be a little more daring in doing less, because the greatest wines we've ever had are the ones that weren't fucked with over and over again and moved around and added additives. So the most you can create more clarity through doing less, and that's kind of become our philosophy. It was, but it really is now.
Yeah, I see that becoming more of an important factor for Washington Rhone varietals. Not to say that there aren't any great Syrahs that have seen 60-70% new oak.
No, of course not.
But
range.
But with the overall expression, I think of what Washington gives and offers for the Rhone varietals, I think there's something to be said about less is more, and letting the varietal and the sense of place come through, and has this purity and sincerity to the wines that I think are just fantastic. I mean, that's to say that Cabernet is still the most planted red grape and the big moneymaker, but I don't think that Cabernet will ever achieve what Syrah ultimately will in Washington, with the diversity of expression and sense of place.
Fully agree.
Again, that's not to say that there's that the Cabernets there aren't good. There are certain places where I think they try and make it work, and it's not genuine. Where parts of Red Mountain, they're just making screaming amazing Cabernets with that sense of place, that mineral essence that's almost like almost gritty, almost like ferric, this iron kind of crunchiness to it that are really nice. But I see a lot of potential for the Rhone varietals for Washington State. So I think you're hanging your hat on the right varietals as far as the reds are concerned.
Yeah. To add to that, Grenache and Mourvèdre, there's a couple sites with some Grenache with a little bit of age, but largely these vines are super young, and the potential is already so profound. But from a climate standpoint, we're in it's pretty darn perfect. We have some challenges where we do have a shorter growing season than you do, say, in the Southern Rhone or Spain for that matter. But the potential, the new year from young vines tells me that these wines are going to be extraordinary. Basically, everything right now that's going into our Grand Vins as varietal or as a Rhone blend from Grenache and Mourvedre, like these would be relegated to Côte du Rhône or like Vin de Table. The vines are so young. I mean, we're lucky if they're a decade old, and to already see potential is phenomenal. So when those vines see 30, 50 years, like it's going to be a force to be reckoned with.
For sure.
In the meantime, they're delicious, but we haven't even scratched the surface.
Yeah, I see the exact same thing happening, and I think Grenache has already proven itself. I think Mourvedre I think it's still on its way. There are some really tasty Mourvedres, but I don't think Washington winemakers have fully played around with Mourvedre enough.
Agreed.
There's not enough to really play with. There's not that much planted, but there's continuing to be more plantings, and I think that will be a really interesting varietal to watch moving forward.
Yeah.
Talking about these red varietals, you also make some white wine as well.
Yeah.
Some Chenin Blanc and some Gruner.
And Chardonnay.
And Chardonnay, that's correct.
Yeah.
But the Gruner is one that's always intriguing because it is Washington State is considerably warmer than pretty much all the parts of Austria, and but it's still very tasty. How did you get into making Gruner, Chardonnay, and Chenin?
So the Gruner we started making in 2012. Attempted to make in 2011, but it was such a cool vintage. And our Gruner actually comes from the western edge of the Columbia Gorge. So it's the vineyard site, Underwood Mountain, on Underwood Mountain, which is adjacent to Celilo, which is another kind of pretty historic vineyard here in Washington. It rains nearly 40 inches a year, and it's colder than the Willamette most vintages. It's like when we pick that Gruner is usually we're just watching the weather, waiting for a big ass storm to come that says we missed our window, it's too late, you screwed it up. So that's kind of, whereas we're like threading the needle in east of the mountains with heat, here we're just like waiting and watching flavor. But that was inspired by, it's just basically like my sommelier geekness coming through, and that was how that happened. Was I heard about it, I tasted it through Syncline Winery, and just went, damn, this is really cool and different and varietally correct, which is always like the baseline goal. And so now, so we've got to make that wine we have two acres that have been farmed for us for several years. The vineyard actually just sold, so we're not making it in 2020, which is a little heartbreaking. But I have two acres were planted for me in White Salmon, basically the next hill over, as the crow flies, or mountain over, and so we'll be back at it. But I was just like, just feeling like we finally got it dialed in with skin contact for phenolics and the right amount of neutral barrel and the right amount of steel with like super cold fermentation to hang on to aromatics. We just got to figure it in, and the vineyard sold. But this is the nature of things. And then the Chenin came about as I wanted to make another white wine, and Chenin Blanc used to be super important in Washington. There used to be heaps of acreage planted. Now it's down to like 65 acres planted before 2001. So it has such a storied history in Washington, and what's such an important part of our kind of vinous heritage. And I wanted to keep that, help preserve that continuity if I could. And that's really how that came about. So the vines we're working with are planted in 1979, and we make it in a dry style. I'd love to play with a little bit of RS, but it freaks me out because I don't like adding a bunch of stuff either, which I worry about the stability of wines. But that comes from Snipes Mountain, and that is a hot site, but that block is largely due south facing, so it kind of misses the brutal late afternoon sun of eastern Washington.
True.
And then the Chardonnay, which I don't even know what year it is anymore. It's 2020. I forget that. 2018.
For the last 10 years, it's still 2020.
2018. We met a grower named Larry Singer at the Rainmaker Vineyard in White Salmon, and he and I have kind of embarked on this pretty cool journey together. And so it's his kind of retirement, semi-retirement, like second adult career. and he's farming this incredible kind of natural amphitheater at about 1,150 feet in white salmon. So again, Western Columbia Gorge. Once the vines are established, we'll be able to dry farming organic. So we got Chardonnay and Pinot Noir there. We'll be making rosé from the Pinot Noir while we get a little more vine age. He planted 2 acres of Gamay for me and 2 acres of Gruner for me. So like that's what I'm super excited about. The gorges, particularly with things warming up the way they are and consistently being warmer, finding those cool pockets that are going to, either going higher in elevation or finding, cooler places that are moderated by here, the Columbia River and the weather systems that come in through the Van Duzer corridor and up the Columbia River. Like this is cool. Is like we're into cool climate in Washington, which is a total, anathema to what we envision when we think about Washington wine. It's a really dynamic place.
Yeah, the Columbia Gorge shows a lot of potential where it does get pretty cool through there. And then if you start looking around, it's a different scenery altogether. There's actually trees and grasses there. Like, where am I? It actually kind of looks like Willamette a touch, different shrubs and different trees, but it's like it doesn't feel like it's Washington. You feel like you're closer to the other side of the Cascades.
Yeah. So the vineyard, so at the western edge of the Columbia Gorge, it's as I mentioned, about 40 inches of rain a year. So it's subalpine, like you're in full on coniferous forest.
Yeah.
And then every mile you go go east on the Columbia River, you lose about an inch of rain. So by the time you've gone a half an hour drive down the river, you're into eastern Washington high desert. And then a little further, you reach what's going to be the Burn AVA, and it's like hotter than hell there. So this juxtaposition within a really a 30-mile stretch, the diversity of being able to grow, like proper climate appropriate Riesling, Chardonnay, aromatic white wines, white grapes, Pinot Noir, and then at the eastern edge, you can get Grenache and Mourvedre like in a 30-mile drive. Whereas right now, like I'm driving from Seattle, I'm to Walla Walla. That's 4.5 hours each way, and that's if I go in a straight line. And sadly, none of these vineyards are right along the freeway. So I'm it's my whole loop, if I include the Willamette Valley, is 900 miles. So to reach the same level of diversity that can happen in a 30-mile stretch on the gorge, like that place is. That's the future.
For sure. Yeah, it's interesting once you get just east of the Cascades. Like you're literally leaving beautiful, lush coniferous forests, and then within just a few minutes drive, you're like, no, I'm in a desert. It's like, what happened? Yeah, it's always surreal every time I drive over the Cascades. From Seattle, heading into Yakima, it's like it reminds me of home. Being born and raised in Arizona. That's exactly what I thought you were going to say about the Gruner. Knowing your mindset, like your song background is like. I thought he's like, ooh, cool, Gruner, let's make that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I was like, I want to learn to make white wine. I'd play around with Chardonnay and in Burgundy in New Zealand and in Oregon. But really, all of my references for winemaking are with Pinot Noir and philosophically and from a technique standpoint. And so I just apply all of that to Rhone varieties, and it seems like. It's just a softer touch, and with that, I can do 100% whole cluster but handle it super gentle, and the end result is a wine that the tannins are supple and seamless, and you get a little green for the first year, and that evolves into something more tertiary violets and the interest in kind of more herbal versus green, and that's all. Again, it's just all things that I'm taking from Pinot Noir techniques.
Awesome, cool.
Yeah.
So. Thinking about the future, looking at production, are there any plans to increase the number of bottlings you currently have or the overall production moving forward?
Yeah, so this year, we had intended to, we've been kind of the last 2 years, we held steady at about 40 tons. We'd hoped, which is around 2,000 cases, we'd hoped to bump up a little bit. We had some great momentum with the current state of affairs. We're tapering back a little bit, just reducing the volume of each wines, also making a Columbia Valley or Washington State Syrah to, again, similar to the Raconteur concept, to elevate the quality of the single vineyard wines, and have something that can be glass pours, retail, a little more retail friendly. Really, just in the next 2 years is about survival mode, frankly. And then beyond that, I mean, the goal, is we'd like to get, the real happy place, from a business standpoint is like 3,500 to 5,000 cases is like where I get to, have create a lifestyle for my family, and eventually, have one job and be just make wine instead of, I'm on the floor full time at night running a big ass wine program, and then and then in the winery by day, sometimes in the winery after service. So seeking balance is the goal for the next decade, and then getting the business to a place that's that we've grown into organically and healthy without having the bank on my ass.
Yeah.
And to my obvious love of the gorge, I'd like to establish our own estate vineyard in the gorge and keep cultivating this, building and working with these vineyards that we have online, but also have a small piece of our own that we can really kind of fully, just as I did with winemaking and that slow evolution and learning, do the same in the vineyard.
Bless you.
Excuse me. The sun coming in off my screen.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah. Awesome. So, are there any varietals that you would like to play with one day?
So like I'm hell bent on getting some Syrah, Serene, so the it's a kind of a Syrah precursor, if you will, that's grown largely in Cote Rôtie in the old days, and getting some of that plant material. I know there's some in Oregon that's made its way up, and so get that. That's kind of like continuing my quest for magical Syrah. That's my kind of what I'm most excited about. And then as far as other things, I'd love to play around more with more white wines just for experimentation's sake. But ultimately, it's I think more about tightening things up rather than just keep expanding out. I think like right now, between the like wine club wines and a blend, with Boucher for instance, we make 4 wines from that vineyard. With the Gamay and Gruner comes on, we're gonna have 4 wines from Rainmaker. It's like something's got to give. I gotta so we need to kind of tighten it up over time. But I like this like 10 to 12 wines in small lots. Lets me have like a ton of fun in the cellar and have a creative outlet, while not getting lost in too many balls in the air.
Yeah.
As Cheryl is asking about sparkling wine, I would freaking love to make sparkling wine, but we need a different facility for that. That requires a lot of space, and we're not. Eventually, but maybe we'll start doing just like a Pupitre for ourselves, like just to screw around. But we're not there yet. But there is from Rainmaker. There's 2 people making sparkling wines that are pretty badass right now. So the potential in vineyards we're already working with is there.
Cool. Well, I suppose you could always turn the sparkling wine into like a secondary project. But you'd probably want to tweak all the bells and whistles and give it that do a proper elevage and give a lot of
no carbonated wine, no pet nat. No, I want we go like full méthode traditionnelle and like put the time in and don't be afraid of that. Don't be afraid of acidity, and that would be the route that I would want to go.
I could see you handling a couple hundred bottles a day.
Oh God, yeah. I can just envision carpal tunnel. Those guys are amazing.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's funny. Like most of them actually don't get carpal tunnel because it's all about the thumbs.
Yeah.
People think you're turning. It's like this will give you carpal tunnel, but they just do this. They get in there and just do this.
That's rad. That's incredible to see. It's like it's the flurry of hands and like
so
how fast
too.
they go. It's nuts.
Yeah.
I would be. It'd be a sad state of affairs for me.
I once saw a chef de cave do very quick riddling, and I looked at it and just the way he did it, just that small quick little turn, is the way he did it. It reminded me of a really great bassist that I saw at a concert. They're just doing it. It's just like you look at it, it's like, how are you so talented? Not even looking at these strings, and they're thumb slapping, and they're just up and down the fretboard, and there's, and it just sounds amazing. It's beautiful, and it reminded me so much of a very talented musician, strumming the strings, making harmonious music, the way the Shevchenko was just going around, just riddling all these bottles so quick, and he was done with the Pupitre within like 45 seconds.
That's nuts. Yeah, it's something. I can't remember the stat, but it's thousands of bottles a day that they can knock out, and a dying art now with the gyro palette.
Right. Yeah. Technology for the win. So you've talked about different vineyards that you're working with now, and additional things that you see on the horizon. Is there a specific vineyard that you'd like to work with someday?
Yeah. I know as from a romantic kind of this angle. Red Willow is the vineyard in the Yakima Valley that was the first site where Syrah was planted. It was brought up the Phelps clone that we work with, which was original Gigal Cote cuttings, made their way to Joe Phelps in Napa, and then made their way to Washington in 1985, 86, and were planted at Red Willow. I think it'd be really cool to work with that block. I think the wines are delicious from there. I also, like true vine, like proper vintage, and then and the Sauer family, I think, are really great farmers. So that would be the place that I would want to work with. I also there are vineyards that were there's rumored vineyards that have kind of gone fallow in a few places in the eastern edge of the Columbia Gorge that are apparently exist. I think it'd be really cool to do something to kind of like rehab something like that and see what magic lies below, and now you leave a vine to grow by itself and it just goes on the ground and snakes all over the place. But if you could, if there's some opportunities to maybe bring back some sort of heritage clone type situation, or discover some things that have mutated and adapted to the terroir and the place as a plant. Not necessarily the wine may be total trash, but it's but I think that like sense of adventure, I think, is really kind of what's driving that kind of forward step, as well as looking back and doing kind of similar to what we've done with Chenin Blanc and with those old vines, and finding these sites where something really someone had some vision and bringing our kind of modern old school twist to it in the bottle.
For sure. Awesome. Yeah, it's interesting to think about, where Washington has been, even just in the last 20 years, how much it's grown, and where it's at now. And you start to project what's going to happen with Washington State. And there are so many exciting things happening in Washington right now. It's hard not to get excited about it. It's just, you see these things, you see these vineyards, and then you start trying the wines and you realize, wow, like there is a sense of place here. And I find it strange that they're not as well represented overseas, because those wines, Washington wines are stellar. There's of course, with any grouping, there's going to be wines that fall towards the middle and towards the back, but Washington has a clear, definitive expression and style that makes you pause and think. I've said it before, where I think if you have a California palate and you want to make your way to the old world, I think if you really enjoy Cabernet and Syrah, I think the natural progression is to head north through Washington on your way to France. And
Agreed.
If you were to, if you were to have an old world palate and you want to start to enjoy more California wines, I think you again have to travel to Washington first, try those wines, and then make your way, south to California, where Washington kind of has almost that middle ground of, it has sense of place, has minerality, and they're very expressive to the terroir that they're growing in, and there's uniqueness and a sincerity to the wines that it shines through, and they're really, really beautiful. Talking about Syrahs, do you have a distinct sense that since they have a distinct sense of place to them, and you can clearly taste the difference between all of your Syrahs if you line them up side by side by side by side by side? Do you have a specific regimen for each bottling when thinking about when the fruit's coming in? Like, we know that you're working with the same clone from different sites and you're trying to keep everything pretty much the same, but is there something that you have a vision for and you say, I want it to be like this? I know it might have been a slightly cooler year or a slightly warmer year. This is what I want it to be. What would that be?
So I really, it's paramount to me to respect the vintage, and so my process is, one, we're trying to thread the needle on when we pick, finding the juxtaposition of course, flavor development and for us lower sugars. So my happy place is if all my wines are, between 13 and 14 for most vineyards, like that's you get all the texture and weight without the wines being clunky and over the top. So we're always thinking about that, but some years, like Lake Helene is 14.5%, and that's the fruit just didn't taste good, didn't feel good. I'm very kind of rely a lot on intuition and feel in the vineyard and in the cellar, and so I'm my approach is literally chewing on stems, chewing berries, seeds, just walking the vineyard and getting kind of there's a little just like feeling the vibe that kind of drives it. And then now, having worked with a lot of these vineyards for as much as 10, this will be our 10th vintage in one vineyard, 13th in another. I don't know how all that time went by, but like at this point, I'm there, I'm in my block, I get the same rows every year, and I know, like, I don't know how to articulate it, but I know when they're ready and I know when they're ripe, and like it's in they're ripe to me, which is someone else might be picking literally a month later. I don't know what their goals are. We have a different vision. But for me, and then in the cellar, the real variation other than pick dates is whole cluster. We don't add any acid. We don't add water. So it's nailing the pick date to the best of my ability within the confines of the logistics of hauling fruit and the weather. And then in the cellar, like chewing on stems, and that really is where I decide how bold we can be or how much we need to pull back on whole cluster in order to make a wine that expresses the place. I'm always seeking to have a greater expression of the place in the case of Syrah, Grenache, and Mourvedre, all of our Rhone varieties, the inclusion of stems, I think, is a part of the grape, is a part of the cluster. It adds. It captures another part of the je ne sais quoi that is a single vineyard wine. So that's the real variation. Those last tiny little decisions of how we're going to sort the fruit. Are we going to crush berries? Are we going to try to leave as many berries intact and get a little bit of intracellular fermentation, which is I like. It brings some vibrancy and freshness to all the density that we have in Washington wine. But that's so. What is it, like Jean-Marc Rouleau says? It's like 1,000 little choices to get to the same result. But that's there. It's in that moment, like just past experience drives intuition, and that leads us to our path in the cellar during harvest. And I mean that's it. Like in the barrel, you're just trying not to you're trying not to screw up what you've just done, but those like up to a month, from a cold soak through, fermentation and pressing, like that, everything, that's that little window is all of it. And then you just try not to F it up, and then goes to barrel. And then after that, it's like, you're just trying to fine tune for the moment that it's best suited to bottle the wine, to highlight all that it has to give, both now and in the long term in the cellar.
Awesome. Yeah, making wine is far harder than people think, but yet it's an art, it's a science, and there's also another element to it. And it's just kind of dumb luck, almost.
There is every once in a while you're like,
Mother Nature.
shit, that's good. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
How'd I do that?
I don't know. You write down everything. Write down everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Diligent notes. Yeah. Diligent notes. And yeah. Now I've got the same team. My sister winemaker's been with me for a few years. So now I have like him in my ear, like, remember when we did this or we did that? And it's like, oh yeah, that was fantastic. And then his input as well. And that's, yeah, I think that's allowed us to have more focus through having, two minds, because it's been like kind of a one-man show with help for a long time now with Oscar, my assistant. Like we've got, like, it's, two minds is greater than one for sure.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. I suppose I should say really happy mistakes, not dumb luck, but
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it's, it's, yeah, as you said, it's art and science. Like there's, to think of like the bacteria and yeast load in the many billions in a single fermenter, like that's, we know it all comes down to science. You can look under a microscope and see it, but there's some magic in there. It's pretty astounding.
For sure. Awesome. So we've got just a little bit of time left. Where do you see WT Vintners in the next 10 to 20 years?
Oh man, I don't know. I get a lot of ideas. So like where I'm at right now is like I want to figure out how we can be greater than just a business, and like fundamentally, like the whole existence of WT Vintners is through this story and this lens to bring people joy. Now I want to figure out, like, we've done that part. One, I'd like to be a healthier business, and that wouldn't we all? But I want to figure out how now we can be a part of some social change for good, and how do we take our success and utilize and turn that into a force for change and for positive change, and certainly driven by the moment, but more importantly, like just driven by like humanity. And so now, it's going to be baby steps. I can't say like, I'm not driving a Maserati, so we're, it's going to be baby steps towards kind of rethinking the model a little bit to drive, be a force of change.
Awesome. Solid words. I know you're a very busy man. You're in a vineyard in Washington right now. I'll let you get back to work here in a second. Before we go, do you have any final thoughts for us about your brand, about the world, about wine, about Washington?
Yeah, I just right now, like, shit, it's crazy. We all, this is, I mean, you're sitting in a fog of smoke from massive wildfires, and the world is ablaze in many different ways. And right now, if you have the means, support small businesses, whether it's through the Somm Foundation, donating a bottle of wine or some cash, a bottle of wine, a nice bottle of wine that you're like, oh, I don't even like this, but it's some, but Anthony gave it 100 points, like, send it over and we'll send it to them, and that'll go to auction, and that'll help a lot of people that are out of work. Go to your, takeout from your, order takeout from restaurants, hop online, order wine from us, order wine from other small wineries. Like, all of everything you can do right now to help support all the small businesses are when we come out the other side of this, we're all going to be in a better place. And that's more if everyone does that little bit, like, life will be a lot better for a lot of people. So just,
sure.
Be the change, as they say, as it said.
Yeah. Wise words. I see a few different wine shops from around popping up saying, yes, thank you. Awesome.
Yeah. It's
cool.
Crucial.
It is crucial. Thank you so much for your time. I know you're a super busy guy. Thank you for connecting with me today. It's been a pleasure. Great to see you. Hope you're doing well. Keep it locked here until next week. We have a really, really fun guest. I have Jason Gorski from DeLille Cellars will be joining me. Very good guy. Until then, stay safe, drink well, and be kind to others. Cheers.
Thanks, everybody. Take care. Thanks, Anthony.
Cheers.